Okay guys, I'm going to help you out with lesson 13's homework, and let's go ahead and take a look at this first part. So what it's asking us to do is convert or to talk about how many ounces are in that fraction of a pound. Well, if you look at the diagram, if that top rectangle, the tape diagram, represents a pound, it's split into 16 equal pieces. Well, we know that 16 ounces are in a pound, so each one of those blocks represents an ounce. So 1/16, if I were to color that in, is just 1 ounce because there are 16 ounces in a pound, and that's what it's representing. So I would put 1/16 of a pound is equal to 1 ounce. Okay, let's look at B. We could either fill in half on the tape diagram, or we could create an equivalent fraction. A half of a pound is the same thing as 8/16 of a pound. And if it's 8/16, that means it's 8 out of the 16 pieces, which means it'll be 8 ounces. So however many 16ths is however many ounces, because there's 16 ounces in a pound, and I could color that in over here. 8/16 lines up with 8 ounces. Okay, let's do the same thing with a fourth of a pound. So we have 1/4 of a pound. I want to figure out how many ounces that is, so I'm going to write 1/4 is equal to blank 16ths. If I said 4 times 4, I get 16, and 1 times 4 is 4, so 4/16 of a pound is the same thing as 1/4, which means it would be 4 ounces is how that would be, or what it would be equivalent to. Alright, let's look at D. We have 3/4 of a pound, and we want to figure out how many 16ths of a pound that's equal to, so I'm going to say 3/4 of a pound is equal to blank 16ths. And if I were to multiply the top and bottom by 4, because that's how I would get 16 on the denominator, I'd get 9/16, which would be 9 ounces, because 9 of the 16. Alright, let's look at E. We have 1/8 of a pound, so I'm going to say 1/8 is equal to how many 16ths? Well, 8 times 2 gives you 16 in the denominator, so if I multiply the numerator by 2, I get 2/16, which is 2 ounces. So 1/8 of a pound is 2 ounces. Alright, and let's look at F. We have 5/8 of a pound. We want to figure out how many 16ths that would be. So 8 times 2 is 16, so we have to do 5 times 2, which will give you 10. So we'd have 10/16 of a pound, which is 10 ounces. Alright, number 2 says draw a tape diagram to show 1 1/4 pounds equals 20 ounces. So I'm going to have to draw 2 rectangles to represent the 2 pounds. Even though it's 1 pound and 1/4, it's a fraction of the second pound. So I'm going to draw 2 rectangles and split them both into 16. So I'm going to split these into 16 pieces. It'll take a minute, but I'm going to split it in half. Then each half into 4ths. And then each of those that are now 1/8 into 16ths. Going to do it again down here. Not as even this time, but we'll keep going. Okay, so I have 2 pounds that I've split into 16 ounces each, and I'm supposed to represent 1 1/4 pounds. So if this whole thing is a pound, I'm going to color in the whole thing. I'm going to count the ounces as I go. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So that's 1 pound. Now I got to do 1/4 of the other. Well, let's see, 1/4 is going to be how many 16ths if we're going to color it in. It looks like it's going to be 4/16. So I'm going to color in 1, 2, 3, 4. So that plus the 16 we just colored in will give you 20 ounces. So that proves that 1 1/4 pounds is equal to 20 ounces. Alright, let's look at 3. We're going to be comparing minutes to hours. So 1/60th of an hour, if that whole thing is just going to be 1 minute. Because there are 60 minutes in an hour, so if it's 1/60th, I can color up here, that's separated into 60, it'd be 1 minute. Well, let's look at B. Well, half an hour. A lot of you know that half an hour is 30 minutes, but this is how we can prove it. So if I have 1/2 and I set it equal to how many 60ths, because 1/60th is a minute, I'd have to multiply the numerator denominator by 30, and I would get 30 minutes, 30 60ths or 30 minutes. All right, let's look at C. Let's do a 1/4 of an hour. So if I had a 1/4 of an hour, I'd write 1/4 is equal to how many 60ths, because we're comparing it to minutes. Well, 4 times 15 will give you 60, so I have to multiply the numerator by that as well, and I'll get 15 60ths, which is 15 minutes. Or I could prove it up here on the tape diagram where I could separate it into fourths. And if I were to separate it into fourths, I'd put a line here, here, and here. So I'd have an equal amount. I'd have 15 minutes in each 1/4 of an hour. All right. Let's look at D. I have a 1/3 of an hour. I'm going to set it equal to how many 60ths? Well, 3 times 20 is 60. So 1 times 20 is 20. So I have 20 60ths, which is 20 minutes. All right, and we're going to skip 4 because I don't want you guys to have to draw 135 little squares on the tape diagram, but you get the gist of how to do it because we did it above with pounds and ounces. You would just have to draw some rectangles and split them into 60ths, which would take forever. So we're going to move on. All right, let's look at number 5. Here we're not going to use any of the tape diagrams just because A, we don't have enough space, and B, that takes a long time when we know how to make it a little bit faster. So we're going to start off with A. We have 2 1/4 pounds is how many ounces? This is just like what we did last night. We know that there's 16 ounces in 1 pound. And so I'm going to be able to convert that down here on part A. So in order to do that, I'm going to take the whole number of pounds and multiply it by 16, and I'm going to take the fraction of pounds and also multiply it by 16. So I'm going to say 2 times 16 to figure out how many ounces 2 pounds would be, which would be 32. And then I have a 1/4 of a pound, so I'm going to say 1/4 times 16, which would give me 16/4 when I multiply it. And we could pull out 4 wholes out of that, so I would have 4. So 32 that I had plus that 4 ounces that I added would give me 36 ounces total. All right, let's look at B. We have 4 7/8 pounds, so I'm going to say 4 times 16, which should be 64. And I'm going to say 7/8 times 16. Well, 16 times 7, I'm going to have to work that off here to the side. So I'm going to say 16 times 7. 6 times 7 is 42. 10 times 7 is 70. So when I add it together, I get 112. And then that's 112 fourths, so I'm sorry, 112 eighths. And I need to figure out how many wholes that is. I can't just say 112 eighths ounces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break that up because I don't know off the top of my head how many times 8 goes into 112. So I'm going to break that up. I know I could pull out 80. 80 would come out of that. 80 eighths would be the same thing as 10 wholes, right? And then what would be left would be 112 minus 80 is 32. So I'd also pull out 32 wholes. And I have 32 eighths, which I know is 4 wholes because I could pull out 8 eighths 4 times from 32. So really altogether it's 14. And then I add 64 in my 14 to figure out how many ounces I have total. And I should end up with 78. I'm going to add that off to the side to show you. And we end up with 78 ounces. All right, let's look at C. We have 6 3/4 of a pound. It's equal to how many ounces? So we're going to say 6 times 16, and we're going to say 3/4 times 16. 6 times 16, and do it off to the side. 36. 10 times 6 is 60. And I get 96 ounces. So I'm going to say 96 here. And then we have 3/4 times 16. Well, 3 times 16 is 48. So I'll have 48 fourths. is what this would be equivalent to. And if I wanted to pull out 4/4, I could actually do that 12 times. So 48/4 is the same thing as 12 holes. And if I add 96 and 12, I get 108 ounces. All right, let's look at D. We have 4 1/8 pounds is equal to how many ounces? So I'm going to say 4 times 16, which we know is 64. And we're going to do 16 times 1/8, which will give us 16/8, which we know we could pull out 2 holes. And 64 plus 2 is 68. I'm sorry, not 68, 66. 64 plus 2 is 66. All right, let's look at E. We have 1 3/4 hours is equal to how many minutes? Well, we know this is going to be different because we know there's 60 minutes in an hour, so we're no longer going to be multiplying by 16. We're going to be multiplying by 60. So I'm going to say 1 times 60. So we have 60 minutes for that first hour. And then we're going to say 3/4 times 60, which would end up giving you 100. Nope, not 90. Should be 180 fourths, because 3 times 60 is 180. And if I were to pull out all the holes to figure out what that would be as a mixed number, I'm going to write 180 fourths out here to the side, and let's break it up. Well, I know I could pull out 80 fourths, which would be the same thing as 20 holes. If it'll let me write over here. So 80 fourths, which is the same thing as 20 holes. I could actually probably pull out another 80 fourths because 80 and 80 is 160, so that's still enough. So I have another 20 holes. Well, if that's 160 and the whole thing is 180, that means there's 20 left. So I have 20 fourths left, and that would be 5 holes because I could 4 times 5 is 20. And so really I have 20, I have 20, I have 5, so that means it's equal to 45. And 60 minutes plus 45 minutes will give you 105 minutes. All right, let's look at F. We have 4.5 hours. Well, first we're going to start off with, we're going to say 4 times 60, which will give us 240. And then we're going to say 1/2 times 60, which really you could know was 30 because you know a half an hour is 30 minutes. But 60 halves is the same thing as 30 holes. 240 plus 30 would give you, oh, wrong spot, would give you 270. Okay, let's look at G. We have 3 3/4 hours is equal to how many minutes? Well, I'm going to say 3 times 60, which is 180. Say 3/4 times 60, which is 180 fourths, which we already figured out in the last one was 45, or on E part if you look up there, so we don't have to do all that work again. And we say 180 plus 45 will give you 225. All right, let's look at H. 5 1/3 hours equal to how many minutes? So I'm going to say 5 times 60 is 300. 1/3 times 60 would give you 60 thirds. And when you pull out all those holes, you'll get 20. And then 300 plus 20 is just 320 minutes. All right, let's look at I. Now we're switching to a different measurement. We're doing yards to feet. So up here, I know that 1 yard is equal to 3 feet, or 3 feet is equal to 1 yard. So I'm going to say, now instead of multiplying by 60 or 16, I'm going to multiply by 3. So I'm going to say 4 times 3 is 12, so those 4 yards are 12 feet. And then 2/3 of a yard times 12 would give me 24 thirds. When I pull out all those holes, I'll get 8 feet. And so that 12 feet plus that 8 feet will give me 20 feet total. All right, let's look at J. We're going to say 6 times 3 because the conversion factor is 3 here. So that's 6 yards is going to be 18 feet. And then 1/3 times 3 will give you 3/3, which is just a hole. So we have that 18 feet plus this 1 foot, which will give you 19 feet total. All right, let's look at K. Again, we've switched measurements. We're doing gallons to quarts, and I remember that 4 quarts is equal to 1 gallon. And so I'm going to say we're going to have to, instead of multiplying by 3 like we just did, we're going to multiply by 4. You always got to remember that conversion factor to know what to multiply by. I'm going to say 4 gallons times 4 is 16. And then 1/4 times 4 is going to be 4/4, which is just 1. And then those 16 quarts plus that 1 quart is going to give you 17 quarts total. Okay, let's look at L. We have 2. We'll do 2 times 4 because there are 4 quarts in a gallon, which will give us 8 quarts. And then 3/4 times 4, which will give us 12/4, which we know is 3 holes. And then 8 plus 3 would give you 11. So 11 quarts is in 2 3/4 gallons. All right, let's look at M. We have 6 1/4 feet. Now we're doing a different conversion. We know there are 12 inches in 1 foot. And so I'm going to, instead of multiplying by 4, I'm going to multiply by 12. So I'm going to say 6 times 12, which is 72. I'm going to say 1/4 times 12, which would be 12/4, which is the same as 3 holes. And when I add those 3 holes plus the 72 that I had up there, it's going to be 75 inches. So again, we're just multiplying the whole number times the whole number with the conversion factor and the fraction with the conversion factor and adding our products together. All right, let's look at N. I'm going to say 9 times 12 because again it's feet to inches, and 9 times 12 will give me 108 inches. And then we have 5/6 feet times 12, which will give me 60/6, which when I pull out all the holes would be 10 holes. So 108 plus 10 will give me 118 inches. All right, if you guys have questions, let me know.